Welcome back to the IE427 garage, everybody. I am working on Michael's car still. And I took the morning off. I just didn't feel like coming out to the shop. You know, I've told everybody when it stops being fun, just stop. And it wasn't fun. It hasn't been fun for the last couple weeks. So I took the morning off and decided I'd come out here, I'd wander out to the shop in the afternoon and address some of the issues that we still have remaining on Michael's car. Remember, we're trying to get this ready to get it over to Miller to get the finished body put on. So what I started with today was trimming up all of the excess silicone that I had put in all of the cavities in the foot boxes where air could possibly infiltrate into the foot boxes. So I've done that. So that's what we've got here. And what I did this morning is I trimmed everything. So I just trimmed it flush with the outside perimeters of the panels up there. And then I did clear around this tube right here, which is our support brace for our power brake booster modification. So that's the bracket we made, and then I just used clear silicone around here. On the other side of the car, on the passenger foot box, I did the same drill. I just basically took the straight edge razor blade. I came in and I trimmed all that really nice, so it looks good. I did the same thing at the top here. And so that's about it. That's all the foot boxes are going to need for right now. Once the body goes on, we'll end up sandwiching a pool noodle in this spot right here in this cavity. That'll seal off any air that's going to want to push through into the cockpit from there. I did get the side pipes put back on. Remember, they're just on with regular bolts and nuts, so they come off easy when I go over to Miller's and go back on when we load it in the trailer back at Miller's to get it back here to our shop. So the side pipes are on both sides. So what I've done is I've got the car up on our Teflon turn pads. Basically, it's just 2 sheets of Teflon that we got from our buddy Dan. Thank you, Dan. I loaned the alignment tool, the Fast Track alignment tool, to Dan years ago, and when I got the tool back, it had this selection of Teflon sheets in it. And I called him and I said, "Hey, what's the deal with this?" And he goes, "Well, what are you using now?" And what I'd used before was VCT, vinyl composition tiles, that you use like for flooring, commercial flooring. And you just smear a little grease in the center of 2 of them, and that acts as your turn pad. Well, these are much cleaner. You don't have to put any lubricant in between them. The Teflon is so slippery that you can turn the wheels and you don't have to have any lubricant in between them. So having 2 sheets of the Teflon and rolling the tires up onto those Teflon sheets helps. It also helps when you're doing corner weighting. I can slide those Teflon sheets underneath the car, and if I have to adjust a coilover and the tire comes down, it'll push back out with the weight of the chassis on the Teflon sheets, where if it's rubber to the steel runway ramp, the contact will keep the wheel out and the car won't settle back where it's supposed to be. So the Teflon sheets come in handy for that too. So I'm working on the alignment right now. Actually, I'm just checking it. And since we've had the car up and in the trailer and out of the trailer and moved around the shop and all this, everything's had a chance to settle. Remember, we've got new coilovers, we've got new springs. The iBox springs that we use are a pretty high quality spring. They're not going to settle like some of the other springs. And so I'm pretty confident that the ride height isn't going to change a whole lot. But the alignment, because we've been moving the steering wheel back and forth as we've been moving the car around and putting it on the trailer and everything else, always has that chance that, you know, it's settled a little bit and everything's kind of getting comfortable in its position. And so I'm just double checking everything. And what I found is that everything was pretty much spot on. I made a slight camber adjustment on the right front. And I mean, we're just talking infinitesimal amounts of degrees. I was probably 3/4 of a degree of camber, and I wanted to be closer to a half. So I brought that wheel in just a little bit, and it may just have been that I was in a hurry the last time. I didn't read the bubble. Maybe I didn't have my glasses on or whatever, or flashlight available to look to see what the numbers are, but the numbers are spot on right now. So what we went for the streetcar setup was a half a degree of camber. So basically that's the top of the wheel and the tire angled in towards the car, a half a degree. We are going with 8. That's what we're shooting for. We're shooting for 8 degrees of total caster. That's the angle that the spindle leans back. So the top of the spindle at the front of the car is leaning back towards the back of the car as the bottom ball joint stays in its spot. So we're going 8 degrees back. We ended up at 8.5 on each side, which is really good. But we did add longer adjusters on the top. So because of the fact that this is a Mark III versus a Mark IV, if we want any less caster, we'll have to cut the sleeves, because they didn't sell a sleeve in between the 4.5 inch sleeve and was it 6 inch or 5 inch? No, we had a 3.5 and they had a 5 inch. So there was an 1.5 inch difference. So you can see here that we are pretty much all the way in on the threads on both sides. But I'd much rather have this than what we had before. We had a 3.5 inch sleeve in here, and we had very little thread engagement in each side. So if worst came to worst and someone wanted to dial in less caster, which I don't know why they would, the sleeves could be cut 1/4 to a 1/2 inch on each side, and there would still be plenty of thread engagement in there to where it wouldn't be an issue. On a power steering car, you really want more caster, especially on a light car like this, because what it's going to do is it's going to allow the car, when you correct after a turn, it's going to allow the steering to self-correct. So if you were to let go of the wheel, it's always going to want to come back to center. I have about 8.5 degrees in slithering, because when you autocross, you don't want a lot of hand over hand if you don't have to. And so if you're coming out of a turn and you can let go of the wheel to bring it back to center and then concentrate your actions on the next turn, it makes it much easier. I hope I'm explaining that well enough for all of you. That's just been my experience. So we've got 8.5 degrees of total caster on both sides. So I didn't have to fuss around a whole lot to get it close. I haven't adjusted the toe yet. I'm going to get the toe close, but I may not get it perfect, because I still want to put a few road miles on this once we get the car finished. And then I will set the steering wheel to center. It's close. So if you look at the car from here, okay, using the back wheel as your straight edge, and you look at the front tire, you can see the front tire is turned to the right just a little bit. And so is the steering wheel. So as I bring this back to center and settle it in where it wants to be, the tire is now pretty darn close to being perfectly straight. And it's going to be the same way on the other side. We're going to go with about 3/16 of an inch total toe in. That means that the wheels are going to be pigeon-toed in towards the center of the vehicle on the front side of the car. And what that does is it helps to keep the car straight. It seems counterintuitive, but it's not. If the wheels were pointed out, what it wants to do is each wheel's fighting to pull the car to that side, to where if you're close to center or just a little bit in, the car is going to want to track straight. Especially if you're on the highway and you have deep grooves in the highway for rainwater runoff. A lot of highways are like that. those grooves with wide tires want to make the car wander. And if you have any toe out in your vehicle, what happens is it grabs those grooves and it just wants to get you all squirrely back and forth because you've got toe out. If you toe those in, it's always going to want to steer you towards the center. And then when you add the 8 or 8.5 degrees of caster that we've put in it, it always wants to come back to center. So it just helps to keep the vehicle more stable. Since this is a solid axle rear on this car, I'm not even going to get into the IRS settings, because the IRS settings, you get a whole different level of complexity. You're going to have toe in the back, but you're also going to have your thrust angle. And so let's not get into that now. The rear on this is fixed. There's nothing we can do about it. All the points are fixed that would allow it to do any type of steering. So it doesn't come into play with the front alignment that we're doing now. When we do a IRS car, which Pauline, I believe, is, yes, I had to check. I can't remember. We'll go over some of those things. We'll go over the thrust angle, and we'll go over the toe in and how to get that thrust angle where it's supposed to be. But for this one, we don't need to worry about that. And it's much too complicated, and I don't want to bend my head around it right now. So I'm working on getting this finished up. I've got to get all of the suspension points tightened back down. Remember, if you're doing any adjustments on the suspension, you want to make sure you've got the proper tire pressure before you start. And then you want to make sure that all of the adjustment points on the control arms are loose. So these bolts, these pivot bolts right here, have to be loose. So there's one here on this one, but there's two on the other side. So you've got one over here and you've got one over here. Those bolts have to be loose. They don't have to be super loose. They just have to be loose enough that the arm itself will move, so that as you're turning those adjusting sleeves, you're not putting those bolts and that hardware into a bind. Because if you do that and they're too tight, you may end up having a structural failure on those points later on. So make sure those are loosened up when you start doing adjustments. And then after all the adjustments are done and you tighten down your sleeves with the stop nuts, then make sure you go back and tighten up those 3 points on the upper control arms so everything's tight. Another awesome song, guys. Green Day, Welcome to Paradise. I've moved on. I've got the car up on the scales. I could have looked back at a Facebook post or one of the other videos, but honestly, I couldn't remember if I corner weighted this one or not. I know I recently uploaded a corner weight video to our Rumble channel. So if you haven't been over to Rumble and visit our channel over there, check it out. It's primarily our older videos, and I'm just trying to catch up. At some point, all the videos will be posted on both platforms, but I'm just trying to play catch up right now. But I've got the car up on the scales, and it's as close to perfect as it's going to get. I think the total weight is 2,018 pounds. And remember, that's without the body on it. We don't have the roll bars in. And some of the other accoutrements that are going to be on the car when it's finished, but that's not a bad weight. And then our cross weights right now are at 50.55. So if I change the corners I take off the left front and the right rear, and I add the right front and the left rear, then we're at 49.45. And if you haven't seen one of the videos that I've done corner weighting on a car before, basically if you're getting that close, just leave it alone. every time you turn one of the coilovers, because what you're trying to do is you're not trying to move weight in the car. And I think that's a misconception that people think of when they hear about corner weighting. Some guys like to be, you know, honestly, I try not to use foul language on this channel, but some guys are smart asses and they call it corner jacking. And that's not what you're trying to do. If you look at this from the safety aspect of it, okay, let's just say that all you're going to do is drive your car on the street, okay? Well, your street car has enough flexibility in the chassis, because it's most likely a unibody, that it's going to flex. And so therefore, if one corner of the vehicle is twisted, right, the suspension will react to it, right? So if you know, the car goes up in the back corner, the car is going to twist in order to conform to the road, within reason. With this type of vehicle, where the chassis is very stiff and the springs are usually stiff to stiffer, you don't have the luxury of having the chassis conform to the road conditions like you do in a modern unibody car. So what happens is, let's say you take your car on a mountain road and you are in a turn and there's some gravel that has washed down from a recent storm and it's on the road, and as you enter this turn, you apply your brakes and your right front corner, let's say it's a right-hand turn, your right front corner is light, meaning it doesn't have the same down pressure as the rest of the three tires. You're going to lock up that brake. When a brake is locked up, it's not effectively braking, it's sliding. Basically, your tire's sliding. You're not braking. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create equal force on all four corners of the car. Okay, so these same guys that are going to tell you that it's corner jacking are going to tell you, well, you know, if you have a passenger car, it's gonna change the weight bias of the car, and that's true. But within reason, it's not going to change the car that much that the front corners or the rear corners are going to lighten up that much. We don't set these cars up unless they are specifically for race application with a driver in the seat or a half a tank of fuel. We set them up basically whatever their static weight is, with whatever fuel's in the tank and no driver, no passenger in the car. And therefore, the car is going to be somewhat balanced. If we were to add 10 gallons of fuel in the tank, it's going to change the weights, right? But if the tank is full versus the tank being empty, that changes the weight too. So on a day's drive, you could start off in the morning with a full tank, and you could end the day with an empty tank. And that's going to change your weight bias too. So everything has to be with, you know, you have to make these adjustments and logically think about them within reason. So with that, we're going to leave this one alone. Normally I will put a car back on the scales after the body goes on. We'll see on this one. Like I said, we've done enough of these to know it doesn't change the weight biased. It just changes the numbers. Generally, the numbers go up, but they go up evenly on all four corners because you're adding a headlight on both of the front sides. You're adding taillights on both of the rear sides, et cetera, et cetera. This car's getting 2 roll bars. So the weight that we're installing on the car after it comes back with the body on is going to somewhat be even front to back and side to side. And we haven't ever seen a significant change large enough to make changes after the car comes back from paint. It's usually just thrown up on the scales to verify that nothing's been changed. So I'm going to take the car back off the scales, put it back on the runways of the car. Oh, here's the other thing. So somebody's going to see that I've got the car up on the lift, right? And they're going to say, "Oh, well, how are you going to weight the car up there?" 2 ways. The lift is locked in. This floor of this shop is dead flat. Rather than a normal garage where there's pitch to it so water runs out, when we built this shop, the floors are dead flat. I think I have a level over here. There's the level. The runway is level. I'll take it across the back. It's level from side to side. So it's no different than if I were to have the car on the ground. So one mistake I made in one car that I had fought with for hours trying to get the corner weights proper was that whenever you start adjusting the coilovers, for instance, I'll have to raise the lift up in order to get access because, one, I have to take the weight off of those collars, right? So I need the spring loose so I can adjust the collar. So what I normally do is I put the bridge jack underneath the car, I raise it up, the chassis up so the suspension is not under load. I'll turn the collars 1, 2, or 3, however many turns I think I'm going to need in order to change the weight characteristics. And then I'll drop it back down on the scales and I'll settle the weight. I'll actually put my body weight on the chassis of the car and get the car to settle back where it needs to be. One day, I forgot that I needed to continue to keep putting the car back in the locks of the lift. And every time I would adjust it, the numbers would be different than what I had previously had them at. And it took me a minute to figure out why my weights were changing, and it was because the cable pulls on the lift are different than the locks. So the hydraulic ram pulls all 4 cables at the same time, but every cable is a different length. And so when the lift lifts the car, it doesn't lift all 4 corners at the same time or at the same rate. And so it will twist a little bit until you get above the next lock set, and then when you settle it back down in the locks, it's level again. So these are things that you have to learn over time and not make those mistakes the next time. Like I said, I'm going to pull it off the lift now. Once the I'm not going to pull it off the lift, I'm going to pull the scales off the lift, and then I'm going to tighten up the set screws on the collars for the coilovers. There again, don't over tighten them. You just want them snug so that the collars aren't going to rotate on the actual threaded bore of the coilover adjusters. Once they're snug, leave them alone. If you over tighten them, what you're going to do is you're actually going to make marks in the soft aluminum that the center sections of the collars are made out of, and then you won't be able to turn them later when you're trying to get the collars to thread past those divots or those marks you make in them. So just get them tight enough that they're not going to move, and leave it at that. All right, a few hours later, and I'm just moving on to stuff that I can do. The roll bars are now pre-fit. The only thing that I will not do until the body is back on the car is drill the holes for the rear legs of the roll bars. And here's the reason why. Normally I could drill them now because I do the roll bars kind of differently. Rarely do I use the boltless mount from 520 Speedworks. I have used them, they work great. But generally I do them a different way. And these roll bars that we picked up from one of my fellow builders already have the boltless mounts installed in them. So with that, you have to make sure that the rear leg orients the way it was mounted previously in the previous car. So if you just drill anywhere, you may go to tighten up the rear leg on its threaded rod and find out that your holes don't line up. So I'm going to wait. It's not hard. With the trunk propped open, you can get in there with a drill and you can drill it out. It's not a big deal. So I'm going to do that later. But I have pre-drilled because we want the holes in the roll bars to have new holes through the mounts. So they're good and secure. We don't want to have to try to find where the holes that are already in the mounts are and drill a second hole through the roll bar. So I've got these mounted, and I've just got the bolts loose. They're just kind of in here and they move. I've just got nuts on the back, and that was just to keep them in place while I drilled the opposing mount on the other side, and I just didn't want anything to move. So these are all in. You can see they're loose too. I'll pull those out and I'll put them in a bag, and I'll mark the hardware that they're for the roll bars. Since I don't normally use the Factory 5 hardware when it's supplied, I end up with extra bolts. And so these are roll bar bolts that were supplied from Factory 5 for other kits that I've put together in the past. And I didn't get any hardware with these roll bars. They were used. They're in great condition. I'm just going to clean them and wipe them down before we go ahead and finish the car up after paint. So they will be nice and pretty and just the way they're supposed to be. If anybody has any question about the masking tape, because I'm not running the threaded rod inside the roll bar right now for fitting, and the rear mount for the passenger side is a bolting unit in the Mk3. See, it's loose. The only way to hold that up there without it just continuing to slide down and possibly scratch something is just to wrap some tape around it. And so that's what I did. I'll pull that off in a few minutes and everything will be fine. But I think, short of a, I don't want to say this because then it's liable to come back and just bite me in the rear. Short of what we have left to finish up on the interior, this car is ready to go to have the body put on. I've taken care of all of the nut and bolting throughout the car. The front alignment is now done. You saw we corner weighted the car. I'm just waiting on seat belts, and hopefully I'll get those in the next couple of days, and I'll be able to get those installed. Normally I like to have the owner come out and we'll check for lengths, but Michael and my wife are about the same height. They may not be the same weight, but I can check for the length of the belts that way. So what I'll do is I'll size them just a little bit bigger than what she is, and then the pull down portion of the belts can be the adjustment for anybody that is, you know, taller or shorter or wider or skinnier. And then I know that Michael might have some young ones that he wants to take in the car with him. I don't know if they're old enough to drive in the car with him yet, but we'll make sure that he can get enough adjustment out of the passenger side seat belts to, you know, strap in a smaller person as well. So we'll be working on that. If you guys enjoy the content, please do the like, the share, the subscribe, and all that good stuff. We will see you next time, hopefully with some more uplifting content. We'll see you guys all later. Have a great day.